Hey everybody, this is Edwin the Magic Engineer again, and this time I am going to review a deck that I'm designing for old school format I call Turbo Stasis. And the point of this deck is it's an old school deck, it's a powered deck, but I wanted it to rely around two main cards. The first card I wanted to rely around was Stasis, and then the other card I wanted it to rely around was the kill condition, which is Black Vise. Now, for some crazy reason, the old school tournament leaders, they decided to let Black Vise have 4 copies of it. And I remember from back in the day how good a card that was, so how much potential for going broken something like that actually has. So I wanted to build this deck and see what it actually works out like. Now, I want to tell everyone this deck is not finished yet. The last one I did, the Rug Crazies, was a very finished deck that I had played in tournaments and did very well with. This one is newly built, but I figured there was value there because I wanted to kind of talk you guys through the process and what I decided to put in and what I didn't, so you can kind of like hear kind of what the evolution of thought process basically is. So anyways, there's, by the way, before I start, there's only there's four Proxies in this deck. And it's funny because, like, you know, 2 of them are like really cheap cards, and they're right here on the top. I looked at my collection. I only had 1 Stasis, so I printed out a couple pieces of paper so I could just try testing with these. And the other ones are on their way in the mail to me from Star City Games, so that's kind of funny. Anyways, so Stasis is going to be one of the main lock conditions for stopping your opponent. And that's been out for a long time. I mean, people have been doing Stasis decks for a long time. Reset is a trick I can use to basically re-energize the Stasis, keep it going for a while, and keep my opponent locked down, but I can recover my mana to just keep that lock condition basically going. Now, as I was saying, the Black Vise is the kill condition in the deck. Black Vise is one of the most efficient damage cards that's ever been printed in Magic, which is why this ended up on the restricted list. And I suspect at some point it's going to end up back on the restricted list. It's just too good. So this deck is really abusing the power of the Vise. Now, copy artifact. I've got 1 copy in here. I probably want to eventually have more copies of it. You'll see there's several targets it can go for. There's 1 drain that's allowed in old school format, so I've got the 1 drain. Now this is a good topic to discuss. The other counter magic that's in there. Now, Power Sync is a really good counter spell that people forgot that it has a mechanic that it forces your opponent to tap their lands. They have to tap their lands and try to like pay this. They can't just be like, no, I'll just let the spell go and let their lands stay. No, they have to actually counter it back. Or if this resolves, it's going to tap all their lands, like whether they want it to or not. So that works really well with Stasis because that forces them to lock down. And on that note, there's 2 other counters that I could have possibly considered, a Spell Blast or a Counter Spell. Well, Spell Blast is very expensive for obvious reasons. It's not as good. I mean, its only real advantage over like this is like if you're going to counter like a Mox, you can just pay 1 blue and there you go. Other than that, Counter Spell does effectively the same thing as this, but you don't have to pay X on it, right? So this is just a better spell. So the question really is like this or the sinks, but the sinks tap down mana, and I've found that to be a big advantage in this deck specifically. So the counter spells actually go away. So Boomerang is there to recover something that didn't have a chance to actually, I didn't have a chance to stop getting on the table, or that I'm actually concerned about. Like if someone drops a Sarah Angel or something, I got to pick it back up because it has vigilance and doesn't tap to attack. And it also has the ability to pull my Stasis back into my hand if I want to recover it. These things are fun. Anyways, so just a little bit of card draw through the Ancestral, and the twist is good for recovery because when you've been playing this deck for a while, you tend to get all your mana on the table and your graveyard's filled with all your used spells, and the twist just gives you a really full, efficient hand again. So the graveyard recovery is actually the main thing that does, but also putting 7 cards in their hand. If you've got a lock and you fill up their hand with 7 cards, this ends up being the death nail, right? So balance is in there just to recover a runaway environment, obvious reasons. There's 2 disenchants at the moment. This is really a question. This might get adjusted one way or another. There's 3 plows at the moment. This also might get adjusted. Now, the Relic Barrier This is an old artifact that people don't see very much. It actually can tap one artifact, any artifact in play, and it doesn't cost any mana to do it. And then every untap, this untaps, you can use it again. The reason why that's useful mainly is for these two cards. Let's say it's early game. I have not locked them yet. I want the card draw, and I don't want them to have it. What I can actually do is I can tap the Howling Mine on their turn so they don't get the extra card. Or right before my turn starts, I can tap down the Winter Orb and untap all my lands. So that's a really good, effective strategy. Another thing, though, is like if they play an artifact creature like a Juggernaut or something, I can lock it down with this, right? Or if they play like a Nevinral's Disc, I can force them to either use it or just they don't have it available on the rest of their turn if I just tap it on their upkeep or something. So the Relic Barriers are really good. The card draw comes in the form of the Howling Mines for the most part. If I've got a lockdown, then these aren't quite so dangerous. Otherwise, it's like putting bullets in a gun that's pointed at your head, which isn't very good. The Winter Orbs are to just slow down the situation and make sure that the opponent can't power out whatever it is their strategy is. If it's a control deck I'm playing, they can't keep their mana open for countering. If it's an aggressive deck, it just slows them down effectively. So Winter Orb is effective against an awful lot of stuff out there. The Kismet ends up being a really important thing. Now, this one has been comboed with Stasis for years because once you get the Kismet into play, the tempo of your opponent slows down immensely because every land, creature, and artifact just comes into play tapped. And they have to just wait that whole extra turn to use it. And that gives me a lot more opportunity to dig down to hit the stasises and get enough mana to like lock the environment. So that's the majority of the deck. And then the mana base is just going to be 7 lands, 6 plains, so just blue-white. Then the dual lands, and these are my other 2 proxies. I need to get more tundras. And then just a bunch of fast artifact mana just to speed things out really quick is effectively what it's going for. So the way that the deck typically plays is on turn 1, you're hoping to basically get, get the land out and then drop a Vise on them, chew them up for a little bit of damage, and then on turn 2, what you want to do is get a Winter Orb out and play and just slow them down, right? If you can build up a little bit of time, then oftentimes what you can end up doing is with even just a little bit of mana, something like this, maybe a couple of those, and like at least like 1 Mox or something like that. If you have a situation like this is a great situation. Like if you can live until that point, oftentimes you're just going to win with this deck. Because somewhere around that point, you're going to blow off your first Stasis. Let me find them. I'm digging down to them. There they are. Well, you can blow off your first Stasis, and then whatever your opponent was doing, remember, he was attacking you with creatures, he was using mana, and all that gets locked down, and he's going to have a really hard time. And this doesn't have a cumulative upkeep, but every upkeep you got to play 1. So since, you probably did this to play it, then the next turn you're going to have to tap, that 1 blue for the upkeep, then the 1 more blue for the upkeep. And so eventually it starts to get difficult. But that's actually where the Boomerangs can come into play. Because if I can, and also that card, let me find the Boomerangs. If I can, at the end of their turn, Boomerang this back up into my hand, then I can allow all my stuff to untap if there wasn't a Winter Orb. Or if I tap this down with a Relic Barrier also, then I get a big untap, then replay the Stasis and keep them locked. And the whole time, you got those Howling Mines out, and they're just drawing cards like crazy. So you're filling up their hand, but then the Vices are just chewing them to death. So basically, all you're trying to do, like the one thing you're doing is just like slow. Slow them down as much as you possibly can to let the Vices just chew them up. And that's basically the deck. Now, there's 2 other considerations that I thought were really interesting. I don't have this deck totally done and laid out, but 2 other cards are a big consideration. You might have noticed there was no Time Walk that was actually in the deck. I'm kind of going back and forth with this one, but the Time Walk, most of the time when I'm playing the deck, all that it ends up really doing is just giving me another turn to draw more Howling Mine cards, but I have to pay an upkeep on my Stasis for it. So it's actually expensive for me to take another turn. I want my opponent to kind of get chewed up. So oftentimes I'm not really going for the extra turn. I'll just throw a Time Walk to try and let my Howling Mines give me a couple extra cards that my opponent doesn't have. So, but there are times it's useful. The Icy Manipulator has often in the past been part of the Stasis decks, and it's definitely in the sideboard, as this is at the moment. The question is, are there enough slots or targets out there that I am not dealing with already that I need to have a 4-drop that can only shut down one thing a turn? That's really a question. I'll have to figure that out as I playtest. Both of these are potential to go back into the deck. But that's kind of like how the deck basically plays out, and hope that made sense to everybody, and you guys have a great day. Bye!